So here we are. We are live on our final big burnout conversation today. So this is our last call for the day today, and I am joined by Marissa Badgley, who is joining us all the way from Connecticut in the US. So I'm counting that now as going global from like the tiny British Isles. That counts as a thing, right? So Marissa is joining us today. If you want to join in on our conversation, please tag us in with hashtag the big burnout conversation or hashtag big burnout conversation. Please tag in Kelly Swingler or myself, and also give a shout out to Marissa if you're watching today. So drop her a note in the comments too. So Marissa, I'm super happy to have you here today. So thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. And I'm really intrigued to hear about your side of the burnout story that you've got. So I'll hand over to you to do your introduction and tell us a little bit about where your journey started. So over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Michelle. So I am so happy to be here. Happy New Year to you. Happy New Year to everyone who's watching live or in the future. I am really grateful for the opportunity to share a little bit of my story. And Michelle and I had the opportunity a little bit before we went live here to talk about how many through lines there are and commonalities there are, regardless of industry and sector and type of work and your level of seniority. And the more we silo these conversations, the more disservice we do to everyone who has experienced burnout. And so I'm so excited to be able to share more about my story, my journey with burnout, and also with its terrible cousins, compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma. I come from the nonprofit sector by trade. So I worked in nonprofits for about 15 years doing capacity building work. And I'll share a lot more about my story, but the bottom line is I loved my work. I was doing work that radically changed things, that was moving the needle in terms of social justice issues and social issues that I really cared about, particularly related to education, youth development, nonprofit, like diversity, equity, inclusion, those sorts of things. And I loved it so much that I thought it was okay to martyr myself. And also that, and I've learned a lot that so much of what I experienced wasn't my fault. And I was consistently within organizational ecosystems that truly weren't serving me or my colleagues. And I'm happy to share a lot more about that. But the short version is that I left my job, my full-time job, in the spring of 2019 after suffering the fourth bout of burnout from the previous years, right? This is not a one-time thing. And my body stopped working, my brain stopped working, everything stopped functioning in the ways that I was accustomed to things functioning. I was a high achiever. And physiologically, psychologically, emotionally, I was a shell of who I was. And it was apparent to lots of people before it was apparent to me. And I left my job without a plan. I didn't know what I was going to do, really did think I would re-enter the traditional workforce, and realized through that time off who I was, who I wanted to be in the world, and that I was really feeling called to help prevent what happened to me from happening to other people in the nonprofit sector and beyond. So we work across, I started my company, Revolution. So that's love in the center of the revolution. We work with companies and humans who are really looking to radically transform their work cultures, their leadership, and their and build places where humans can be well and where humans can be supported as humans and as the messy humans that we all are. So that's the Cliff Notes version. And I'm happy to share more.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And do you know what I think? And I can see Kelly's dropped something in the comments actually, where Kelly has said it's so common for people to love the work they do when they experience burnout. And that's just the notes I'd written as you were talking, is that's one of the themes that's come out really strongly for me in all of these conversations so far, is that everybody that I have spoken to loves their job, loves the industry, loves what they do, really feels passionately about it. And everybody that I've spoken to so far is experiencing this like cyclical nature of, that burnout. So you said like burnout number 4, I was the same. It was like it's almost like a familiar feeling, right? You get it and you're like, oh, here we are again. So yeah, really, really fascinating that you've got that similar kind of experience in terms of that real love for the job that you do, as well as that like, oh, here we go again, it's another cycle.
Yeah, and what's interesting about what you just said is that yes, you notice it and it's a familiar feeling, but we are enculturated to dismiss it and to have these narratives that tell us that like we need to be stronger, and if you just push through a little bit longer, everything's going to be okay. And people telling you that if you controlled your negative thoughts, everything would be fine. And like, it's just like, that's not real. And I'm on a mission to silence those narratives. Bubble baths and pizza parties and those things are not going to cure the biological phenomenon that happens when your body shuts down. And I know that when I was at my highest burnout, it was also when the guilt and the shame were the strongest. And what I have learned since leaving my role and really studying the science of burnout is that, gosh, we need to give ourselves more of a break. And I know I was so hard on my body. I was like, why are you doing this? Like, why are you in so much pain? Why can't you just handle the stress that's being thrown on you? And well, I have learned that my body was doing its damnedest to protect me, and that it had moved into energy conservation mode because there was no more energy left to give. And when we can understand what is happening to our body, then we can do something about it. But I'm actually a lot more interested in taking the onus off of individuals to fix it and figuring out what are the systems and policies and structures that are enabling this over and over and over again, and addressing them at those levels. Because most of the things that cause burnout are actually outside of an individual's control. And so it doesn't matter what you do. Our organizations need to get better at noticing it, as naming this as a hazard, like a workplace hazard, and doing something about the root causes. A lot of the guests that I've heard on this so far have talked about that. And we're really good at addressing symptoms and telling people to go heal themselves, but there's a much bigger and more powerful conversation that needs to be had.
Yeah, for sure. And I know Kelly is absolutely passionate about preventing burnout, it being eminently preventable. And it's about organization wide, right? It's about cultural, it's about industry. And then the 2 conversations that I've had today with Amy was based in the food industry, which is such a high pressure, intense culture, environment industry. And then Stephanie, who was just before you, was in education. And again, the kind of cycle and the system and the process of how it works over here is that the intensity is so high, but of course, because you get the school holidays and that vacation time, you just kind of slowly recover enough to then go back and do it all again. And it's that kind of, it drives its own thing, doesn't it? It's awful.
Yeah. And one of the things that I talk to my coaching clients about a lot, and also with leaders who work with people who are burnt out and are often burnt out themselves, is that people come to me and they're like, they just took time off. Why are they still so stressed? Or someone says, I just took a 2-week vacation. Why am I still feeling this way? And part of it is that we don't do a great job of closing the stress cycle. We turn off rather than doing healing. And I would much rather people take a day off and do intentional healing work for themselves to actually close that stress cycle. And simple things like laughing and crying and socializing, those are things that can help. But you don't need a 2-week vacation. I mean, I needed 3 months once I was in like the throes of burnout and was no functioning. But if we can get better at just fine tuning our systems in the moment and having people hold us accountable to that, because I know that like I needed someone to tell me to slow down. And nobody ever did that. Well, if you're my best friends who are watching who told me to slow down, I'm sorry.
You didn't count.
But you didn't count. And you didn't my boss and my colleagues and the people who were signing my paychecks to say, like, this is not sustainable. And not just go take time off, but go take time off. Here are some resources you can use to be able to support yourself. And let's interrupt this cycle.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point around just looking at that permission almost to be ill and to recover and to take
Mm.
that time. And it was one of the things that was just so powerful for me was I just needed permission. And I didn't, and like you, I didn't get it from, senior leaders, colleagues, peers, maybe people that just needed to give me that little nudge. But when I
Mhm.
went to see my doctor, that, I'd been 3 days, I think, off, and I went to see my doctor, and my doctor said, you just need permission to take time off. And I literally just, it was like somebody cut the strings. And I just went, oh, okay. Yeah, I get it now. That's all you need sometimes, right? Just that, like, hang on a minute. This doesn't feel
Mhm.
right. Are you okay? Are you sure? And it's that kind of permission, I guess, is
Mhm.
the thing that I'm going for. And I think that that's really important
Yeah.
to not forget in there is permission and someone to say, oh, hang on a minute, like, come back, I'll help you.
Mhm.
And I think that's another, I think a theme almost of everybody that I've spoken to anyway has been about everybody wanting to give back, to then have that space and give that space to others who are going through it. And I'm sure
Mhm.
that's what you do now, is that kind
Mhm.
of, well, actually, I didn't have it for myself when I experienced it, but now I want to be able to give that to other people. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's another one that's really important, is remembering to almost give back when you feel safe to talk about it, and create those spaces for people is really important. So yeah, hard
Yeah.
resonate here.
Yeah, and put responsibility where it deserves, which is like not on you, right? It's not. And so if you're watching, right, if you just heard what Michelle said, you have permission to take care of yourself. You have permission
Yeah.
from both of us. Please do it and reach out if you need help on that journey, to any of the guests on here. I think that as you were talking, a big piece of my burnout story that I talk about is that health journey.
Mm,
And so in the 6 months when right before I left my job, I was hospitalized 3 times in those 6 months, thinking I was dying. Like 2 out of the 3 times, I really thought I was having a heart
yeah.
attack. My entire,
Yeah.
like, I'm there's something seriously, seriously wrong. And after lots and lots of testing, the only diagnoses they could give me was stress. And that's infuriating because I can't do anything about that, right? There
Yes.
are people who need me. There are causes that I care about, and the system that I'm operating in is allowing me to continue going.
Yeah.
I and then excuse me. So when I'm in that, right, the doctor says, like, you should take some time off, like, heal, recover. And literally, I go from that appointment to facilitating for 100 people, or to a conference, or
Yes.
to do something else. And so
Yeah.
immediately ignoring the professional medical advice of the people
Mhm.
who were in my care. But the kicker there is that my boss knew what was happening. I was keeping her in the loop, them
Yes.
in the loop, not just one person. And that permission was not granted.
Yeah.
And I think that I have realized that there are parts of that I could have handled differently, right? Like,
Mhm,
there
mhm.
now I know that I needed to have set a better boundary. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
coming in after I just had, like, invasive procedures
Yes.
and, like,
Yes.
was under general anesthesia. Like, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
But we're a part of the system that says it's okay to do that. And that's
Mhm.
where that martyrdom comes in, where we can't afford to do that. Um, Ultimately, when I finally wound up getting, like, diagnosed for one of the things, I was experiencing this really intense gastrointestinal pain.
Yeah.
And it was shooting pain that made me want to cry.
Mm.
And I did so much testing, and they could not figure out what was causing it, could not figure out what was causing it. And eventually, when I finally was diagnosed, they found that there was a part of the top of my small intestine, called the duodenum, was literally rotting away. And there's only one cause of that, which is stress.
Wow.
And if you look at the anatomy of the human body, where that spot is literally the core, like the center point of your entire body. And
Mm.
my core was rotting away. And that's how I describe this to people. It's like, when you're experiencing burnout, you lose yourself to the point where, like, your essence, the things that matter to you, the things that are most important, they rot away. And we
Mm.
we we need to do better than that. For me, it was above and beyond burnout. I know that Stephanie talked a little bit about her experience in the education sector. Most of my work has been in youth development, education, prior to going out on my own. And this compassion fatigue thing is real. And I know this is really common within the HR sector as well, where when you are a person who cares about other people, that is that adds additional stress, and we don't necessarily always have that language. I know that learning that term was really, really important for me. And one of the things that I teach in my burnout seminars is that very often when we're talking about burnout, we're talking about workload and how much you're working and the quantity of the work. And leaders will put interventions into place. Okay, we took stuff off of their plate. Why are they still burnt out, right? They couldn't possibly still be burnt out or experiencing compassion fatigue. But the thing is that we can't only look at workload. We have to also be looking at feeling load and thought load. And every single task carries a feeling load and a thought load. And we can only ever operate at 100%. And so that load, those extra loads, we just don't talk about. And we need to start talking about how much we feel and how much that drains us and how that requires more recharging.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I'm nodding furiously along with you, because as you touched on in HR, that, the compassion load is unreal. That's what I hear a lot is, there's no other profession that has to deal with things that range from people who are very, very unwell, so terminally ill employees who die, employees who are like wanting to take their own lives, employees who are horribly stressed, people who are being bullied, and then dealing with and trying to manage the organizational culture, trying to create safe spaces, people trying to deliver great training. We're trying to do all of these things as well as the day job stuff. It's unbelievable. And it's only when I start to really think about all of those things that I'm loading up. I always talk about it like a backpack, right? So this carrying that great big backpack of stuff just all day is just unreal. And people don't realize how heavy that is, how heavy that weighs, because a lot of people don't see it, right? And a lot of the time in HR, we talk about the face, putting on the face, because nobody will see the face. And I wonder if that's the same in your experience. And I think, one of the things that is an ongoing conversation, particularly in HR, is whether we have that kind of supervision. So, in counselling, for example, you have supervision, don't you? In some youth work, kind of nursing, medical type arrangements, you have supervision, an opportunity to come and talk about, what's on your mind, what's stuck with you this week, that kind of stuff. But we don't have that in HR. And I just think that's a really powerful option for us to be thinking about. So I don't know if you ever had supervision in your roles. Is that something that you had when you were employed?
Yeah. So I am a social worker by trade. So I have my master's in social work. And so supervision has been a part of my journey, but I'm not a clinical social worker. So it has not been a huge part of my journey. What I will say is I have had tremendous leaders who have given me a lot of care, and they also were operating within the same harmful systems that I was. So I have to take off some of that pressure. I transmuted a lot of anger towards those folks for a long time, but I've come to a place of releasing that and really practicing forgiveness. And like, we were all a part of that broken and harmful system. And so I certainly had leaders who cared and who were there and who listened and who really wanted to be there within the extent of what we were trying to accomplish. And I think there are organizations that are starting to bring in organizational social workers as a role and so I've seen that. It's certainly not a popular trend yet, but hopefully it will get there. I also think that this is something that we can train others to do. So in my work with organizations, when we're doing training on how to build a burnout resistant work culture, it's about training everybody to know the warning signs of burnout so that you're not the one who has to intervene in that moment. Your colleague comes and says, I know that one of your warning signs is blah, blah, blah. I'm noticing this. Like, do you need support? And then having those resources or like common drive or a document or something that says like, here, maybe we can't have the supervision here from a clinically trained person, but here are people who are offering that, or here's what's available through our company, in general. And I think that's really important. I run a community called the Millennial Manager Collective, and it's one of the things that we talk a lot about in terms of managers is that as you get higher, fewer people are looking out for your well-being. And so leaders get a lot of, like they get a bad rep, but who's looking out for them, right? We have to be looking up and providing care in all directions, not just downward, which is what we as employees often demand. So making sure that supervision runs in all directions is incredibly important. There's something else I wanted to say, but I'm blanking on it. So feel free to riff for a second.
Quick, Michelle, Phil, do a little dance.
Oh, I know. Yes, I got it. So,
I did it. I didn't even have to dance.
In the United States, where our police officers carry guns, there are some states in the United States that any time that a police officer takes their weapon out, does not have to fire it. Anytime that weapon is taken out, they are required to go see a therapist. Ooh. And I'm sure it's not great, right? It's not probably super well regulated. It's probably like, I don't know that. But what I advocate for in organizations is that rapid response protocol, right? Yes. So I wasn't in HR, but I experienced so much of what you were describing, working in education, kids and families and communities in need. And I can remember, and this is a really drastic example, but I can remember going to a school for a site visit, and somebody had just been shot, and they were laying on the ground. No emergency medics were there yet, so presumably there's still somebody with a gun out there. And I come up, and this is what I'm looking at, and I made my way to that meeting and told my boss what had happened, and we still had that meeting, right? Like when we're experiencing trauma, whether it's minute trauma or a big trauma, there needs to be a protocol in place that says, hold on, pause. And this is for organizations that are working, doing anything that involves human awfulness, right? Yeah. If there are people who are struggling or are directly impacted by global events, how do we create levers within the system that offer care? So it's not just on people to figure it out, because people are going to mess up. Systems mess up too, but let's design them better, and so that they actually exist.
Yeah, no, I really like that. And I love the concept of a rapid response protocol in that work environment. Oh my goodness, that's got so much like possibility in there. It's just such a great idea, isn't it? Like we don't do enough of that kind of stuff. I love it. Yeah, that's that's mine now. It's great.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Take it, scream it from the rooftops. Everybody needs rapid response protocols as a part of like building burnout resistant systems, which is really like the next wave.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think it's a great option. And I think even what you were saying around, I mean, we have things like mental health first aiders, right? Who, you can go to and have a conversation with if there's something, mental health related that you want to talk to somebody about. But I just think that I love the point that you said earlier on about, those, I know what your kind of symptoms, triggers, warning signs are, let's have this open conversation now because I've noticed this, that would have been such a great gift for me at the time, when I was in that burnout space. It would have been great if somebody just sat me down and said, you told me this is one of your things, what can I do to help you? What am I seeing? What is that? That just would have taken that almost like the head of steam off, just had a little pressure valve that might have just been enough to kind of bring me back from the brink. So I love that concept. It's a really good idea.
And if that's something that anyone wants to talk about, I'm happy to talk about it more. We create or one of the things I teach organizations to do during their onboarding process, like light years ahead of when burnout might happen, is to ask those questions and then create a database of, for your team, what are their red flags? What are their triggers? And I have tools for all of that. So I have a leadership trigger assessment where, like, with the most common causes of stress in workplaces, and stress isn't bad, but when stress multiplies and is unmanaged, then we get into this burnout stuff. And so we have these tools, we have these resources, and we can do them for organizations sort of in aggregate so that we can do intentional action planning and recalibrating on that systems policy department level rather than just on the person level. And that's really powerful. And I think I know at least one of your other guests, and I'm not remembering their name right now, was talking about tools to be able to diagnose what's going on. And I have found that to be incredibly powerful, where we have a tool where we can diagnose what percentage of folks are at low, medium, and high risk for burnout with the compassion fatigue arm for industries that require it, and what are the root causes of it so that we can move forward. Right. What I will say is it's not enough to just have a how to prevent burnout workshop. This needs to be a lot deeper than that. And when you have data to back it up, you can make the case to the board. You can make the case to your funders. You can make the case to your people that this is something that we need to do right now. Because we are in an emergency situation in a lot of workplaces.
Yes. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think there's almost like that, it's like taking away that shameful part of that kind of burnout mental health stuff, right? I mean, I remember when I burned out that nobody really spoke to me apart from my team. Like, none of the SLT reached out to just check in, like, and then they hadn't really been told why I was off, but it's so interesting, isn't it? Like, so I felt badly enough as it was, and then I was like, oh, well, maybe it is a bad thing because no one's really talking to me. Whereas, had I broken my leg, broken my arm, done something, very overtly physical, there'd have been flowers, gifts, people popping over, people offering to cook for me, people offering to help, and it just doesn't happen in that same way. So I think I love the idea of making those conversations commonplace so that if and when it happens, it's just a conversation and it's not a big, like, shame-filled thing that you're just sat at home on your own and it's really hard. So yeah, I think that's a really, really good point.
And I think we have to just name what I said before, like, stress is real and stress is not going anywhere. Your old job, my old job, like, all jobs are going to be stressful. And I think that there's this misconception that this is younger people who are entitled and just not accustomed to hard work. And, like, your body doesn't shut down just because you are unaccustomed to hard work. That's not really a thing. But there's a lot of gaslighting that happens. And I know that I was getting messages from people who are really close to me, not necessarily my bosses, but like, just like, you're paying your dues, just like push through, like, it's okay. And like, I know that from a couple of people, even in my family, it's like, you're a saint for doing what you do. We're so proud of you. Like, just keep pushing. It's like, no, actually what I need to do right now is completely stop. Like, I just need to stop. The world is not going to be fixed because I work this extra 3 hours or because I push myself to the brink. And it's not about just it. We can't gaslight ourselves. And we do a lot of that, especially when we really care.
Yeah, I completely agree. Kelly's dropped in the chat. I've just seen that Kate Jenkinson from this morning mentioned that her MD had mentioned a poem to her to help with her burnout. And Kate is a poet. So as a poet, this really, like, resonated with her more than anything else. So it sounds like she had a really good example of a great leader who was connecting something back and making it really personal to her. So that's a really interesting concept to think about. And again, I didn't have that experience, but it's interesting to think about, those pockets of great leaders are in the minority. And, I had one great CEO who would always ask me twice when he asked me how I was. And that was enough for me just to go, oh, it's really horrible and I hate my life. But sometimes that's enough, right? It's a great tool just to kind of go, Are you though? Are you
Mhm.
sure? And that can be really powerful. And I can see Kelly's also dropped in that, which aligns to what you were saying about it being a really systemic, organization-wide kind of event. But burnout prevention isn't just a task or a project, it's how we do everything, right? So that's a
Mhm.
really, really interesting point as well, which I think really resonates with what you've been saying today.
Yeah. And I think it's about adopting a new paradigm, right? It's about disrupting what has existed
Yeah.
for a long time, recognize that in some cases it's really not working, and that there are alternatives, right? The work that you do, that Kelly does, that all of your guests do, we have alternatives for people who are ready to implement them, and they are not super high cost. They are not
Mm,
rocket science.
yeah.
It is really about understanding the science of what happens, and the really sometimes easy levers to pull to
Yeah.
support human beings in their time of
Yeah.
need. And burnout isn't only caused by things that happen at work. So you have your burnout from work that compounds with life and
Yeah.
having being a caregiver or living in a community in high poverty or experiencing any other level of trauma. And
Mm.
so we have to recognize that our workplaces need to be conducive to the full human experience,
Yes.
which does not mean sacrificing accountability. Sometimes I say that to people, and they're like, but the work still needs to get done. Of course the work still needs to get done, but guess what? It's not getting done, and it's not getting done well by people who are
Yes.
burnt out and in the hospital because their small intestine is rotting, right?
Yes.
Like that's not that's not sustainable. But it does require us to shift away from individualism. It
Mm.
requires us to shift away from like productivity based metrics only,
Yes.
and really like we call it revolutionary community care.
Mhm.
Like thinking about how do we build spaces where care flows in all directions, up,
Yeah.
down, diagonally across, and people feel truly cared for as that radically complex human.
Mm.
And we all are. And none of us is going to be perfect. And there are
Yeah.
certainly things I would have done differently if I were to go back and do it again. Um, but I was also a lot younger and I have more experience now. And hopefully, people who are listening will be able to learn something from me. But this knowledge is out there at this point.
Mm.
We know it. We can choose whether to see it and do something about it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And what I'm conscious of our time, but what would you say to pre-burnout Marissa that you would have wanted to have heard? I know we've talked about like permission to kind of stop and take rest, but what would you say now to pre-burnout Marissa?
Yeah, so I think the like permission to stop is a
Mm.
piece of it, but I don't think it's actually the most important piece. Um, I think it's a bunch of things. I don't know how many. I thought I knew how many, and now I don't. So one of them is it's okay to set boundaries, and boundaries actually help you build better relationships and
Yes.
do better work. And so that's something I've spent a lot of time paying attention to.
Mm.
I also think that part of it is not what I would say to Marissa as her most amazing self, but Marissa's gremlins, those negative self things that happen in my
Yeah.
head that I have active conversations with on a daily basis.
Hmm.
Um, really practicing compassionate self talk and disrupting
Yeah.
those negative things like you're not strong enough, or I don't belong here, or you're such a
Yeah.
failure for not being able to
Yes.
get through this, and having the tools to be able to do that.
Yeah.
I think another thing is that I've learned a lot about is the importance of releasing things that are outside of your control and sphere of influence. And I spent a lot of time, right? I was like trying to change the world. We were trying to create like new paradigms for equity and inclusion and education, right? These are big things
Yeah.
and not things that I had any control over myself as one human being.
Yeah.
And so I think about this. In my workshops, I talk about these three realms. There's like your sphere of control in the middle, then there's your sphere of influence, and then it's the danger zone. Like everything else outside of that sphere of control and influence, if you're spending your energy on that, that takes away energy for the things you need to be giving energy to. And that's where, and energy is what burnout is all about. So, in a retreat I recently led, somebody said, well, it's like setting boundaries with yourself. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly it, right? It's like, I am not going to expend energy on this thing over which I have no control at all, which could be an annoying email from your boss or a giant thing like racism, right? We like choosing how we expend our energy goes a really, really long way. And I think that really, I think the last piece is, and I'll say this like as a directive to people, like know who you are. And the moment where you start having to compromise on your values, on what makes you who you are, on your gifts, that's the moment where you should start to think about, am I in the right space? And if you're in the wrong space, burnout is much, much more likely. In a lot of ways, I was in the right space. And it's never just binary, right? And I also was sacrificing a lot of things that were really important to me, including time with friends and family and time to just write for fun or go for long walks. And having to sacrifice yourself in the name of the greater good never gets you anywhere. We have to preserve ourselves for the fight because we ourselves are important in the fight. And that feels really important. You deserve to be you and to be able to lean into your gifts. We deserve that. And your leaders should see that. It's not your fault. Right? And I was like, if you need to hear that again, it's probably not your fault. And that really matters. I really spent a long time thinking it was my fault.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I really liked what you said about you can choose where you spend your energy. And I think that's just so powerful because that was one of the phrases that was said to me. I was in therapy at the time, and my therapist said it to me, and it was one of those real oof moments where I was like, oh my God, I can choose. Like, it's so powerful. And interestingly, along, the know yourself and know your values piece, that's when I used to leave roles, was when my values are compromised. And somewhere along the way, I lost that a little bit and then burned out. But yeah, it's some of the things I do in coaching with individuals is really focus on, okay, what are your values? Like, who are you? And I know one of Kelly's favorite questions is, who are you at your core? And that's powerful because that helps you then to make those decisions and know when you're being kind of pushed, compromised, boundaries are being bent or broken. It's great. It's so powerful.
Yeah. I think the last thing that I'll say is that last piece was really about individuals. If you are an organizational leader who is watching this, there's a lot of work and talk around preventing burnout, which is really important, but it is only one half, and maybe even less than half of the question. Really, where we need to be moving is not how do we prevent burnout, but how do we actively cultivate well-being and wellness for people? That doesn't just mean that people are not burnt out, right? The absence of illness or burnout does not mean you have a well culture. And so maybe we can have another conversation in 6 months about how to do that part, right? It's like, how do we actively make sure that our ecosystems are cultivating emotional well-being and spiritual well-being and cultural well-being? Like, all of those pieces are so important. And we can't just focus on the deficit. We have to, how do we actually create places where people can thrive?
That's such a great point. Such a great point. I love that. What a great and strong finish. That's really impressive. Thank you. I feel it all now. So thank you so much for an absolutely fantastic conversation. I could genuinely talk to you for hours. So thank you so much.
I'm happy to do that whenever you'd like.
Yes, and let's have wine. So how can people find you? What's the best way to find you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is my most active presence, which I know the link will be, like, I'll be tagged in all of the things. So
Yeah.
you can find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me. Just let me know that where you found me, and I'll accept that request. I don't accept from strangers because LinkedIn likes to spam people. So you're not a stranger if you've been watching this, so please connect with
Woo.
me. You can find my services and information at truerevolution.com, which I know is a mouthful. I'm not going to spell it out. I'm going to trust our moderators to put that link somewhere. And again, we work with organizations internally to create burnout resistant organizations. We also do leadership and management development programs, but we also work with human beings whose organizations might not be ready to embark on the work. So if you're looking to engage in a public program or coaching, I'm here and my DMs are open. So let's chat about how to make 2024 your best year. And maybe I'm still here, but my host has left. So if you are still watching, thank you so much for tuning in, and I will hopefully, oh, there she is.
What did I say about how great the tech had been? And then now I get booted in the last.
It was perfect. I was just closing out saying thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. Thank you for being a part of the movement to shift these things, because we need all of the love warriors out there carrying it out. And I'd be happy to be a partner with you on your journey if you're interested, and that would be helpful.
Thank you. And thank you so much for professionally carrying on the conversation without me.
You're welcome. I've learned a lot in pandemic times. You just got to go with the flow.
Oh, my internet was doing so well. Thank you. It has been genuinely wonderful to speak with you. So thank you so much. We will tag you in the post so that everybody who has been following the Big Burnout conversation will get a sight of you. So thank you. I will hit the big red button and we will finish the call. There will be a short, awkward silence where we'll just be like waving, jazz hands. Thank you so much. Everyone.